So one of the challenges with labeling line features is that line features often come in not a single cohesive line, but lots of little tiny pieces. So, for example, a road network in a city, the street might break at every single intersection rather than be one nice long line. In this case, these rivers have lots of little tiny segments. Basically, every place that a creek or a stream intersects them, even though we don't see it on the map, that main river was interrupted at that point and made into a line section. And so if I open my attribute table, you can see here I've got just a billion. Red River of the North, let's see, I have 124 pieces of Red River of the North, which is kind of a lot. Red River of the North, it just runs down the western border here. So if let me just randomly pick one. And you can see that's a teensy weensy little segment of the river. So what happens is when I try to label this river, or all of the rivers I should say, it's going to just jam stuff in everywhere. So let's see, for example, Red River of the North, I only have one, but I've got 4 instances of the Mississippi River, a couple St. Croix, a couple St. Louis, a couple Minnesotas, and I could fix that. I could go into my labeling properties and I could come over here and say remove duplicate labels. But what happens is when it's made up of tiny little pieces like this, the label is connected to a line segment. So as I start to turn on other labels and label other features in this map, all the labels move around to try to make room for each other. And that label is going to attach itself to a teensy weensy little piece of river. And so I may wind up with some really awkward shapes. So it's generally easier to kind of glue all the pieces of the river together, merge them into a single line for each river, so that as those labels shift and move around, they've got more flexibility about where they show up, and you'll typically wind up with some less awkward things. Like the Mississippi here is practically falling off the end of the river because it's trying to wedge into that first little piece. So let me first get rid of my selected piece of river here. So what I'm going to do is run the dissolve tool, and it's under analysis. You might have it in your little shortcut box here, but if you don't, just hit tools and type dissolve, and it should come up as the first one out of the data management toolbox. And I'm going to put in my rivers, and then I'm going to make sure that my output is in my project. So it's in my Minnesota typography folder, and then I usually like to tag something on so that I know that I've dissolved it, or whatever operation it is that I've done. And then it's going to ask us dissolve fields. Now, if I didn't put anything in here, it would glue all the rivers together as a single file, and that would be a mess because we wouldn't be able to label it. What I want it to do is to glue every piece of each river to itself. So I'm going to use the name field as the dissolve field. So it's going to take every one of these 124 pieces of Red River of the North and make them into one, and then it's going to take all the pieces of Mississippi and make them into one, and so forth. So we'll let that run there for a second, and it's a pretty small file, so it really didn't take very long. If I did the whole US, it would obviously take a while. Let me turn off, actually I'm just going to turn this layer off entirely. So it looks exactly the same. This one came in labeled because the other one was labeled, and you can see it's still got multiple labels on here, so we're still going to have to fix that duplicates problem. So I'll say remove duplicates, and then I should wind up with one label per line. But the difference, as I mentioned, we can't really see the difference, but the difference is that now it's got the entire length of the river to play with as it shifts to accommodate other labels. Right? So, super helpful. One other little caveat to check for, it looks like 2.5 has sorted this out, but in 2.4, if I set this on river placement, for some reason, it was coming in with this stack box checked, and so you'd wind up with all the pieces of a multi-word label stacked on top of each other, and that's not okay for line features. So just double check and make sure that that box is not checked on your line features when you label them. All right, happy mapping.